Professor Madhusudan Penna, our Vice Chancellor. So Penna sir will be delivering the lecture on the tradition of Natha Yoga and integrated approach. So before I request Penna sir to start the lecture, I wish to just give a very brief introduction of Penna sir, even though he is very well known and very famous. But as a part of this lecture series, we will be giving brief introductions of the speakers. So I'll just give a brief introduction of sir. So Professor Madhusudan Penna is the Vice Chancellor of Kavikala Guru Kalidas Sanskrit University at present. He is the Dean of the Faculty of Indian Culture, Religion and Philosophy. And he has many awards to his credit. Sahitya Academy Award and Vachaspati Award by the Rashtriya Sanskrit Vidyapith and Yuva Vipaschit Award, and many more awards are there to his credit. And Penna sir has a very big list of works to his credit, and one among those are Kavya Kantha Charitam, Mahakavya, of the life depiction of Kavya Kantha Ganapati Muni, and Prajna Chakshasham, another Mahakavya for which he has received Sahitya Academy Puraskar, and he has 8 Laghu Kavyas, 9 edited texts, and many more translations that are from Sanskrit to Telugu, Sanskrit to English, Marathi to Sanskrit, and etc. And there are many monographs also to sir's credit. And so this is just a brief introduction of Honorable Penna sir. So I request Professor Penna sir to kindly deliver his lecture.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So, Asmat Gurubhyo Namaha. I welcome all the participants in this bright evening that we will be pondering over the essence of yoga as that has been bequeathed to us throughout the generations and as we've been practicing throughout life. So this is really a great moment in the life of an yoga aspirant that we have got a chance to deliberate on the key aspects of yoga on one side and the great tradition that has come down to us in its pristine form. So in this short time, we would like to deliberate upon that. At the outset, I would like to tell you that though I'll be speaking mainly on this Natha Sampradaya, we will be intermittently talking about several other related things also, so that you will have an integrated idea of the entire theme. Now, the topic is integrated yoga as per the Natha tradition. Now, we should just have a kind of retrospection that what has prompted for the origin of this Natha Sampradaya, what must have prompted the then yogins of this land to go for Natha Sampradaya when there were so many other traditions already in existence in India. So when we look back, we find that the great tradition of yoga had come down to the medieval time. That means before the time of our Natha teachers. So there were already great yogic traditions. Already the Tibetan Vajra Yoga was in practice, and here the Hatha Yoga was to some extent was in practice, and Raja Yoga of Patanjali Maharshi was also in practice, and several learned commentators, scholars were already producing valuable commentaries on that. So that was the philosophical and religious situation here in India. And I would like to tell all the participants that after all, you cannot separate religious rituals, all that, from the philosophy, because if philosophy is the quintessence of your religion, then religion is nothing but a manifestation of that, and therefore they have a kind of mutual interdependence. So that is there, and therefore on one side we have to understand the religious picture of India, especially during the medieval period. So when we see that, we observe that before the time of Patanjali, there were already the Buddhist, Jaina, and Tantric yogas prevailing in India, and there was huge number of followers. So those traditions might have attracted some other people to study and try to explore the various other interpretations, all that. So the Bauddha tradition, the Jaina tradition, Tantra tradition, and the Patanjali tradition. Apart from that, there was also Purana tradition. And by the time of Bhartruhari, much of the Kashmiri Shaiva Agama were already prevailing, and Shaiva Agamas were frequently studied, like the Shaktagama. And there was a kind of natural intellectual response to the theories of those texts. And by the time of Bhartruhari, you may say that 4th, 5th century, already it was an age of intellectual pursuit in India, especially because many great scholars were already producing monumental works. Those were not general works like commentaries. That means generally we find that the commentaries, they base their interpretation on a particular existing work. So commentary has some base, but there were original works also. That means for the first time they were produced. So that was the lineage we had got throughout the centuries. And in the time of Shankaracharya also, there were great yogins, already accomplished yogi like our Govinda Bhagavad Pada and his great master Gaudapada. They were already great yogins. It was a well-established fact during their time, and even if we study the lives of all these saints, we find that that was the situation, and there were great yogins. And you cannot separate a yogi from a Vedantin, because inside, if it is true transformation, you find that it is same. And in the Nata Sampradaya, it is very strongly held that the summum bonum of yoga will be definitely Vedanta, because Vedanta, whatever it tries to say, that is actually the say of yoga also. And out of their personal experience, most of the Natha teachers also supported that idea. And we find in the works of many Natha teachers this kind of ideology. Now, when Shankaracharya appeared on this planet, perhaps in the 8th, 9th century, according to the modern tradition, we find that he also practiced rigorous yoga, because he was a practical yogi, and he practiced that very rigorously, and already achieved high yogic achievements. That is further collaborated, or you can say attested by the accounts given in the biographical works written by our Vidyaranya or our Anandagiri. So there we find some biographical sketches, and all these scholars had unanimously accepted that Shankaracharya had contributed. And therefore, recently when a commentary called Vivarana was published on the Yoga Sutra under the name of Shankaracharya, people felt that it was Adi Shankaracharya, and they were so thrilled that a new commentary has come into existence, while Ramanujacharya's Bhashya is not available. So people felt that this must be the same work that was produced by Adi Shankaracharya. But when they went through the commentary, they found that the commentary is not from the pen of Adi Shankaracharya, but it was another Shankaracharya who was a Nyaya scholar, and You can find a very deep influence of that in the commentary called Vivarana. And that is Shankaracharya's yoga commentary. And he was already experiencing some yoga to great extent. He was experiencing that. And he had a very clear vision of Jagat, Ishvara, and Jiva, Jivana, Moksha. All that, it was very clear to him. And he wanted to present a different picture of yoga, as we find in some of his bhashya works and in some prakarana granthas also, like Yoga Ratnavali, in the yoga. You find in the Shvetashvatar Upanishad bhashya also some reference to the yogic practices and how Shankaracharya corrects them, saying that this need not be practiced and this way it should be practiced. And later, many yoga practitioners had studied this, and they had as it is, they had taken these ideas and have written the Yoga Upanishads also in the medieval period. So thus the literature continued. And when Shankaracharya talked about the importance of Advaita on one side and the way of achieving that kind of high flown state through the practice of yoga, so that influenced many yogins. You find in the annals of the history of yoga in India that many such people were influenced by the ideology of Adi Shankaracharya, and before him was also, as we know, Gaudapada, Govinda Bhagavatpada were there, and Advaita, that had exerted a kind of deep influence on the psyche of Indian people of that time. So that we should keep in mind. And Shankaracharya, he had very clearly stated in the other Prakarana Granthas also that whatever has been practiced in the name of pranayama, whatever has been practiced in the name of asana, are actually not yoga. Nowadays, we very often hear that kind of statement, but Shankaracharya was the first person who had boldly stated that this need not be taken as pure yoga, because yoga talks about a very high objective, while the other things are mostly related to the body and not the psyche. So that was the problem. And in order to achieve that kind of a great state, what spiritual discipline you require, that also Shankaracharya had stated in many of his Prakarana Grantha, like the Viveka Chudamani, all that. And now, before coming to our Nata, we should understand that already there was the Buddhist spiritual influence, Jaina ideology, and Vajrayana, all that was already in practice. So naturally, people were confounded. People got confused that which is the right way or the most practical way to reach the highest goal of human life. So people, they were already misled. And in the Bhagavad Gita Bhashya and Adhyasa Bhashya also, we find that Shankaracharya also faced many of such confusing thoughts. And therefore he says, anarthancha iyat shreyasah nishreyasat pratihanyeta. So he says, if you don't have your own uh, proper discretion, and if you don't have proper guru, you may accept anything in the name of philosophy, and you may be misled, and ultimately your final goal of life will not be achieved. So that Shankaracharya also very clearly stated. And that being the case, when after Shankaracharya, Bhagavad Ramanujacharya also had written, it is stated that he had written a commentary like Bhashya on the Yoga Sutra. Along with the other Bhashya, this was also mentioned. And uh, Ramanujacharya also makes some stray references to some of the yoga practices and theories in his commentaries, and he very clearly upholds the final theory of yoga, especially when he explains in the Sri Bhashya the popular shloka that Itihasa Purana Bhyam Vedam Samupabrahmayet Bibhetyalpa Shrutad Vedo Mamayam Praharishyati. So he makes very clear that this Upabrahmana should come from your yogic strength. So he says, unless you are a yogi and you have achieved that kind of a high flown state, you cannot expect to make kind of synthesis between the Itihasa Purana and the Veda. So there also he clearly mentions that it is through the yogic experience that you get the strength. So that was Ramanujacharya, and Madhvacharya, Nimbarka, Vallabha. They were all God-gifted saints, because we find in the life of all these saints that they practiced yoga, they experienced that, and they led a very disciplined spiritual life, not falling prey to the ordinary worldly attractions. So that was there. And Vallabhacharya, at the age of 12 itself, he got the great name Jagadguru. So already he had written commentaries on the Brahma Sutra and other, and independent works are also available in the name of Vallabhacharya, Nimbarka, and other scholars were already there. So by the time of 10th century, the Advaita was fully established, and Visishta Advaita was just rising, and there were already the Buddhist Jain traditions in India, and Mimamsa was also in practice. So that was the picture. And people, as I told you, were misled, or some thinkers thought that these people are misled because in the name of Advaita, they were telling that everything is mithya, but they could not practice it, because saying that everything is mithya is different from practicing that means in life. So that was one anomaly some thinkers found. And similarly, many people were practicing, that means they were performing rituals, but these thinkers felt that they were practicing them without any knowledge and they were blindly following. So that was superstitious. So on one side Mimamsa, on the other side the Advaita. And already in the Kashmir region, the Kashmiri Tantra, Agama, came into existence by the 9th century. And Vasugupta had already written that, Somadeva had written the Shiva Drushti. So those were very monumental works before this 10th, 11th centuries. And already in these, the Shaiva thinkers, the Advaita thinkers, and Vaishnava thinkers were in a way discarding some of the age-old practices in the name of religion, in the name of yoga also. So thus, there was a kind of necessity that the yogic practices were to be totally overhauled or serviced, and a fine cream of the yoga was to be presented to the society, so that there would be a very healthy and strong society. That was the need that the thinkers of that time felt. And then appeared all of a sudden, according to the modern accounts, around the 10th, 11th century only, Matsyendranath. So according to many Natha traditional accounts, we find that Matsyendranath, his birth itself was a very divine origin, because it is said that he was born from a Matsya, that means a fish. And when he was in the stomach of the fish only, that means he was just a small fetus, or you can say a small child. But when he was in the womb of that Matsya, he happened to overhear the dialogue between Parvati and Shiva. See, we naturally ascribe many such divine things to their birth, their work, their tapasya, everything, because deifying is a natural process throughout centuries. So naturally, people said that Matsyendranath was in the stomach of the fish, and he as a child overheard the dialogue between them. That's a spiritual communication. So a kind of conversation was happening between these two, and he overheard, and he had received that divine knowledge directly from the prime cause of the universe, Shiva Shakti. And they say that it transformed them. That means that kind of sacred knowledge had totally transformed that individual. He became Matsya Indranatha. And we know that Matsyendranatha, though he was not the first of Natha, because Adinatha is stated to be the first of that, but Matsyendranatha has been accorded a very high place in the tradition of Nata Sampradaya, that he has been revered as the original, uh, the propounder of this philosophy or tradition, you can say, because this is a tradition in which the high philosophy is also mixed with the religious practices. They also have some religion, though they discard other. So Matsyendranath, he appeared on this earth, and he was a very detached person, that throughout the life he was just moving. And one day he happened to go to Ujjain, and there he happened to see a family lamenting for issues. And this Matsyendranath assured them that they would get a child. And we know from this account that he had given them some ashes, and the couple, they had just out of thrown the ashes into the cow dung. And later, after 9 or 10 months, when Matsyendranath happened to visit the same place while going back, he happened to meet those parents and requested. When they requested, then he asked, "What happened to your child? Is he born?" Then, though the couple replied that out of a kind of negligence, we had thrown that. Then Matsyendranath went to the cow dung, and he had seen the place, and immediately he said, "Hey Gorakh, come out." So according to this particular account, when he called the name of Gorakh, and that Gorakhnath came out of the cow dung, very bright, very impressive, and very handsome fellow, very tall and very good looking. And it is stated that Gorakhnath then itself, that means at that time he accepted Matsyendranath as his final guru, and leaving his parents, he simply followed him. And Gorakhnath followed Matsyendranath, and they had moved across India. We know from this Navanatha Amrita and other, that they had moved in all parts of India, right from Kanyakumari to Kashmir, Afghanistan, Tibet, Nepal, Gujarat, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, all the places. And their influence was so high that people immediately yielded, because of their divine origin, and because of other things attached to their life, and because of the spiritual fervor that was directly seen on their face. So that spiritual radiance was just oozing out, and people were so impressed by that, and they had become followers. This is the account that we get from the Navanatha Amrita and other texts. In Telugu, Marathi, Tamil, and other languages also, the biography of all these saints found. So then Gorakhnath, he was moving around, and sometime it so happened that Matsyendranath had gone to one place, and now people say that it was Sri Lanka, Ceylon, and he happened to marry a lady, which was actually against the Natha tradition, but later it was accepted, and he was comfortably leading a life of a householder. So then Gorakhnath, the story goes like this, that Gorakhnath went there, and he had um, uh, he made his guru to realize that he is born a yogi, not a grihastha. Then Matsyendranath left the place. By the time he had a son also, and they returned. And while returning to Madhya Pradesh, they had relaxed in Maharashtra also, like Karanja and Ujjain, all the places they visited, Nashik and other places. So this is the tradition that from Matsyendranath in the modern time, that is medieval time, the Natha teachers appeared, and at a time there were 9 Natha teachers. According to the tradition, the names of these Natha teachers are different in different books, because we have so much tradition. Even in the Buddhist tradition also, we have the names of Navanatha. So it is very difficult, because Navanatha Siddha and 84 other Siddhas. So the names are differently found. And one Varna Ratnakara gives several names till today. So these the names of the teachers are differently stated, because Navanatha Charitam, there is a Telugu book. So it says Shivanatha 1, Meenanatha 2, Sarangadhara 3, Gorakhnath 4, like that. So it goes, it gives a different picture. But if you Kadali Manjunatha Mahatmya, if you happen to study the book, you find different names of the Navanatha, and Goraksha Siddhanta Sangraha presents different names. And Nepal, in Nepal also we have the tradition of Natha. And recently I happened to go to Guwahati Kamakhya temple, so I found there also the influence of Natha. Then Sudhakara is also another text in which the names of Navanatha differently mentioned. And in Bhagavata, there is a mention of the Navanatha. And Agni Purana has the mention of Navanatha. So according to these, the Navanathas are differently, the names are different. And whatever it may be, one popular tradition says the Adinatha, the Navanatha account. So it says, first there was Adinarayana Matsyendranath, followed by Gorakhnath, who was Hari, and third Antariksha, that was Jalandharnath. Then equating that with the Bhagavata tradition, Prabuddha was Kanifnath, and Pippalayana was Charpatnath, and there was Naganath also, and other were there like Gaininath, Revannath. So in some accounts, Gaininatha's name is missing, but mostly Gaininatha's name is also mentioned in all these, and Sanskrit references are also found in that. So it so happened that when Gorakhnath was returning along with Matsyendranath, he happened to find Gaininath, and he taught all the Natha Sampradaya to him. By that time, Revannath and Chauranath, they also met, and totally there were 9 Natha popular, and they moved across India. I told you, they went to different places and spread the fragrance of this Natha Sampradaya. And we find that in Maharashtra, especially when the Natha Sampradaya entered, it was through Nivrittinatha, that is Gayaninatha's disciple. And in Nashik, when Gayaninatha happened to meet Nivrittinatha, a very young boy, naturally Gayaninatha assuaged him and had passed on the sacred knowledge of Natha Sampradaya. The only difference was that before this, the Natha Sampradaya was mostly Shaiva. And Gayaninatha, he passed on the great tradition of Vishnu Sampradaya or Vitthala Sampradaya to Nivrittinatha, and Nivrittinatha had returned to his parents, and there Nivrittinatha had personally taught this to his brothers and sister, that is Sopanatha and Jnananatha, and Muktatai was already there, and thus the entire family of Kulkarni, they got this sacred knowledge from Gaininath. So that Natha tradition entered into Maharashtra like that. But these see, Jnaneshwara's father was a great Vaishnavite, and Gaininatha, who gave Diksha to Nivrittinatha, was a Shaivite. But it so happened that, according to one account, that Jnaneshwar Maharaja's father was a Visishtadvaiti, because he happened to meet one Ramanandacharya in Benares, though he is not the Ramananda Yati, popular. And he was a very good follower of, staunch follower of Visishtadvaita, and therefore he got this from the tradition, that is Vaishnava tradition. And what may have led to this change in the Natha Sampradaya, we don't know, but we find that Nivrittinatha was so attracted towards the Vaishnava tradition that for the first time he had opened the secrets of Vaishnava tradition to Jnaneshwara, the very tender young boy of high intellectual caliber. And his prowess, as is evident from his Jnaneshwari, Amrutanubhava, Haripata, etc., is unimaginable. A young boy of 15 years explaining all the secrets of darshana and especially connecting everything of the philosophy, that is really unbelievable. But Jnaneshwar Maharaj, he had accomplished that. So Jnaneshwar Maharaj, he got this knowledge from his brother Nivrittinatha, and by that time, the Vishnu tradition in Maharashtra, Shaiva tradition from the Nata Sampradaya. So both got mixed, and the Vishnu, Krishna, Vithala. Because by the time in North, there were already some saints, some Sampradayas were there, like Sanaka Sampradaya, Vishnu Sampradaya, Rudra Sampradaya, Aditya Sampradaya, Shri Sampradaya. So they were already there, and by the time of Jnaneshwar Maharaj in almost 13th century, because 12th century end, Barashe Barotari, Vyakhya Keli, Ani Sachidananda Babu Adare, Lekhaku Jhala. This is the last of the Jnaneshwari commentary. So I find there that Jnaneshwar Maharaj had all this information. So he had presented a different kind of Nada Sampradaya through his works, in which we find a very good amalgamation or a kind of synthesis in his works, in which we find equal place accorded for all the deities. They are not different at all. This is a very conspicuous influence of Gorakshanatha philosophy. So this is Vishnumaya Natha Sampradaya. But when it entered into the Maharashtra, all of a sudden it took a different turn. That the Vishnu Sampradaya, it became Varkari Sampradaya. So it was no more the Natha. It became, that means it had taken upon itself the verb of the Varkari. And the Varkari Sampradaya owes its existence to Jnaneshwar Maharaj. And Jnaneshwar Maharaj has filled this Nada Sampradaya with the fragrance of Vithala, that is Pandharpur. And thereafter we know that during his time also there were many saints along with Jnaneshwar Maharaj that who had moved from Paitan, that means though he was born in Apegao, from Paitan to Pune, Nagar, and Alandi. So all these areas they traveled along with Jnaneshwar Maharaj, and naturally they were so influenced Varkari, you can say, who practiced Natha in the name of Varkari Sampradaya. So thus a new tradition evolved from that. And we know that Namdev, Ekanath, Tukaram, and many other like Janabai, Sakhubai, they were also very staunch devotees of Vithala. And thus the Natha Sampradaya had got a kind of facelift in Maharashtra state. And it continued. That's why the Panduranga Natha recently claimed Panduranga Natha is none other than Gulabrama Maharaj, because he said perhaps it was in 1903 that Gulabrama Maharaj was initiated into it, and he called himself, I am Panduranga Natha, I belong to this tradition. And it was his Diksha Nama, though he was born as Gulabrama Maharaj. So Gulabrama Maharaj also asserted that this is the sacred tradition that has come down to us in the form of Natha, but it has taken a different facelift in Maharashtra. And when we look back, we find that the philosophy that has come down through Varkari, through Natha, that owes its existence to Gorakhnath philosophy. Because Gorakhnath was a very accomplished yogi, I told you, who did not accept or was not ready to accept anything in the name of religion and philosophy unless he was fully convinced of the rationale of that particular ideology, and then on the other side, the scriptural support of that. So that was Gorakhnath. And the account goes like this, that he got the sacred knowledge directly from Matsyendranath, and he spent a lot of time with his teacher to study the great text of Vyakarana, Nyaya, Vedanta, Tantra, and other. So a kind of essence of all these darshanas you can find in his works like Siddha Siddhanta Paddhati, or you can say Gorak Shatakam, Gorak Vani, and all these. And there are stray verses attributed to Gorakhnath. So this is Gorakhnath, who was a great scholar because he had the strength of Sanskrit. That he was a very acclaimed grammarian, logician, philosopher, and himself a practical yogi. And he was a wanderer, wandering monk, not just confined to a place. And so that was the influence of Gorakhnath, that people naturally got attracted towards this bright young man, like Yamunacharya was attracted to Ramanujacharya. So we find in Gorakhnath a very rare blending of all these qualities. And that Gorakhnath, he had uh, filled breath into the Natha Sampradaya, because before him, Matsyendra Natha had not written anything. So throughout India, there are so many Natha Mathas even now. And this is Natha Sampradaya that has come down to us through Jnaneshwar Maharaj in Maharashtra, and Chaurangnath, Revannath, and other places also in Madhya Pradesh, in Assam, Nepal, Haryana, Punjab. So in all these areas, even now we find the Natha Mathas. And a few years back, I had been to one Natha Matha in Gwalior, where they had shown that it is a very ancient matha, and it has some land allocated for that. So they are living on whatever revenue they generate from the land, and they had shown all the places there. And recently, one of their teachers got the Jiva Samadhi also, so that they belong to this rich tradition of Natha, they said. So this is in other areas like Madhya Pradesh and other areas, we find the Natha influence. And when it comes to the Natha philosophy, I would like to tell you that before Natha Sampradaya, and even before the Shaiva philosophy in Kashmir, not in South, but in Kashmir, people were engaging themselves in high debates, and were trying to prove to others, convince others that whatever they know is of high quality, it is Shastra, and what others know is not at all valuable, etc. That kind of mutual hatred was also prevailing, that in the name of religion and the Shastra, people were engaged in hot debates, and that debate was not just intellectual, it led to mutual hatred, mutual animosity, mutual a kind of aversion. So that was the wrong thing, because in the name of yoga, people were hating each other, and hatred is never recommended by the yoga. That is the problem. And in Sufi also, you don't find hatred, it actually nurtures love. And when you are able to understand your own existence as a very passing phase in the Mahakala, it is only Khandakala that you are there, then you understand that all the other also are born like you. The intellectual or physical or psychological capacities may be more or less, but we can easily understand that we all are born in the same manner, and we all share the resources here on the planet, and all the animals, creatures, etc. So naturally, some people who had practiced the real yoga could not digest this kind of ideology that nurtures hatred among human beings, because human life itself is a rare thing. Naratvam durlabhan loke, shaktis tatra sudurlabha. So when we understand that we are given this particular body for some time, and in this body we are supposed to accomplish something, or you can say carry on some duties allocated by the Lord, because yadhatatyah yadatatyatah vedadhat shashvatibhyah samadhyah. So ultimately, it is that divine energy that assigns various duties to various individuals, and there is in a way no competition, no hatred, no such negative feelings. But when people were developing such feelings, and there was a kind of social distance among individuals, today it is more. You can understand and appreciate my idea that today you find that it is more. The more a human being is educated, you find the more hatred he is developing, the more distance he is preferring. So that is most unfortunate. So in the 11th 12th centuries also, when the uh, highly spiritually enlightened people observed that people were leading or living an ignorant life, unfortunate life, and uh, they were just prey to the psychological limitations, or you can say weaknesses. So naturally, the spiritual gurus, the teachers, they wanted to pass on to the generations of the time the message that ultimately we are all one, and the divine energy manifests itself in the body, and it is our purpose that within this short life that is given to us, we should realize the flow of this divine energy. Not only realize, we should be able to put that into some activity, we should engage it. So this was the high message that was given by the Nata Sampradaya, and in this process they had introduced the greatest theory of Shat Chakra, Kundalini, because in pure Raja Yoga you don't find any mention of these. Patanjali Maharshi also does not speak of either the Kundalini or the Shat Chakra, though he says Nabhi Chakra, Kantha Kupa, etc. Actually, he is not referring to the Shat Chakra that are mentioned in other Tantra texts or the Natha texts. So naturally, it was an obvious influence of the tantric tradition that the Nada Sampradaya also had borrowed the Shat Chakra concept, and it was to enlighten the people that all the energy is hidden in you. So this particular uh, contribution is really great contribution, that people wanted to feel the energy within that, and the the pivotal theory that the Nada Sampradaya had given to this yoga is that they said whatever is in Brahmanda is in Pinda. And this idea was totally taken up by the Nada teachers like Gorakhnath. And whoever approached him seeking this sacred knowledge, he had given the message that it is in you. And for that, he had prescribed some of the techniques through which we can arouse the hidden energy called Kundalini in some Tantric Yoga or Hatha Yoga texts. So he had prescribed some method through which one can arouse this Kundalini, enlighten that, and he can focus that on whatever he prefers. So that kind of a spiritual instruction was given by the Natha teachers. And here you find that in the Shaiva, that is Kashmira Shaiva philosophy also, you have so much of yoga, but still they were not bent upon the exposition of this Shat Chakra. You don't find it there, because Abhinavaguptacharya himself, a great yogi, he simply discards the age-old concepts like pranayama, asana. He says, Vrudha nasa pidanam. He says, just pressing your nostril is not pranayama at all. You must be able to get that clear pranayama internally. So the moment you think, your breath is held. And Paul Brunton writes in one of his diaries that he encountered such kind of a great yogi in Tamil Nadu who said, I can demonstrate some of the yogic feats. And when Paul Brunton had insisted, that yogi had demonstrated that he could hold his breath for some time so that there will not be any pulse rate, there will not be any heartbeat. And according to modern medicine, that means medical science, that person will be declared as broad dead. That's all. But he had shown that 5 minutes I can hold this, and you see that you cannot feel my pulse or heartbeat, nothing. No heat in the body also, dead. But after that, he was just observing, will he come back or not? And the foreigner is observing, and that person came back to his senses and said, yes, I'm here alive. What do you say? Then he said, you are a great yogi. He said, I am nothing. My master is from Benares. He's there in Kashi, and he can hold for half an hour also. And that was the greatness of the yogi of that time, that they were really accomplished hatha yoga masters. And even Narasingha yogi, who was in Kolkata at that time, had demonstrated, and that was before, right in front of Sir C.V. Raman, that he had demonstrated that whatever people call as poison, very poisonous and instantaneous death is assured. That kind of potassium cyanide, sulfuric acid, people offered to him, and he had simply put on his tongue and simply gulped and remained intact. So that kind of very risky things were also demonstrated. And Natha Yogi, they were really very great Hatha Yoga teachers also at the same time, because they had understood that this body can become a very great weapon if you really understand its potentiality. And thus, the Gorakhnath had recommended this kind of Shatchakra, Kundalini, and taking that to the Brahmarandhra. But in the Kashmira Shaiva, by the time Abhinavaguptacharya also had introduced a Diksha system, where the inner energy can be taken to the top level and all the tattvas will be filled with the divine energy. A reference to this is found in Jnaneshwari 6th chapter also, that how the entire body can be filled with the divine energy. So this is a very beautiful picture of the yoga he has, Gorakhnath has given to us, and he had got the sacred knowledge from his teacher and from his own personal experiences. And this Natha Sampradaya lays emphasis on the identity of Shiva and Vishnu. And of course, other Varkari teachers had continued this legacy. We find in the works of the Varkari teachers like Namadev, Tukaram, that there is no difference ultimately between Vishnu and Shiva. But we know that during the period of Jnaneshwar Maharaj also, there was a kind of I should say a very wrong spiritual atmosphere, because people were following only one and saying that yours is wrong. These Shaiva people were telling that the Vaishnava are wrong, because in Tamil Nadu, the Chola kings, they were punishing the Vaishnavites, and naturally when the Vaishnavite came into rule, they were punishing the Shaivite. So it was a kind of total, I should say, chaos, spiritual chaos in the Indian peninsula, that the Natha Sampradaya spiritual masters wanted to just destroy everything and open up real yoga to the public of the time. And we are also blessed to have that sacred knowledge throughout the centuries, that even today we have great Natha teachers. May not be as great as Gorakhnath, but still Natha teachers are there, Natha mathas are there, and they are following their own tradition very sincerely. Their dress will be different, and the attire and other things will be different. And the Trimurti and Trimarga, that is one of the very important Natha theory, that the Trimurti and Trimarga. So it is Dvaita, Advaita, Dvaita. You find each one is accorded its own place in the spiritual practice, that nothing is absolutely discarded. No, they say it is not to be discarded absolutely. It has its own relative value, and we should understand that. And similarly, when they are talking about the Trimarga, we find there a kind of fine blending of the three, like Karma, Bhakti, Jnana. Karma is in the form of the yogic practices. So all these are given equal importance in this tradition, that you require these. Of course, in the Advaita also we have that karma, then bhakti, then jnana. So a kind of succession is recommended there, and maybe that is the influence of Advaita, that the Nata Sampradaya also had accepted that. So they say Pindamadhye Charachari yo janati. So it's actually a mix of like Manipravada, a mix of Sanskrit and Hindi, that the one who understands the presence of the divine energy in his own body is the real Natha, though they split it differently. Na atha, na atha natha. But other people say, no, it is na atha. Atha adya they say. Anadi, in that sense, they use the word natha. But Gorakhnath, he said, why do you unnecessarily waste your time in the name of Dvaita, Advaita, Visishtadvaita? Because the ultimate reality is beyond all these. Jnandev Maharaj, especially in the 15th chapter, presents a very beautiful picture of this kind of interpretation, that Dvaita, Advaita, Visishtadvaita. Ultimately, though you prefer to follow one system, you find that everything is important. At one level, you will be a Dvaiti. At one level, you will be an Advaiti. At one level, you have to be a Visishtadvaiti. And the Visishtadvaita thinkers also had faced the same problem as is stated by Bhagavad Ramanujacharya in the Vedartha Sangraha, that ultimately it is very difficult. We have to accept Dvaita, we have to accept Advaita also. So therefore it became Visishtadvaita. People say it is Bheda Bheda only in another form. But they say, no, no, ours is not Bheda Bheda, we are different. Ours is Visishtadvaita, they say. And the later thinkers, as we see, some thinkers followed only Dvaita. Some thinkers followed only Advaita and Visishtadvaita. Therefore, Gorakhnath says in his Gorakh Paddhati also, Gorakh Shataka also, Gorakh Vani, though they are in other languages. So he is stated to have written some books in Sanskrit also. So he says very clearly that don't waste your time in the name of some particular school. He says, in that way, you are missing that heavenly glory that the God has presented to you. You are not directly open to the beauty of this. You are actually, you are analyzing a reflection of the original thing. That means the reality. So the reality and its reflection. So people are misled, or people are fascinated by the image, the reflection, that they go on explaining the reflection, analyzing the reflection, and try philosophizing the reflection. And Gorakhnath says, Arey, you go for the reality. That reality is beyond all that. And it is not explicable. It's not something that is, or that can be expressed through words. The Veda itself says, not us, yatra shrutihi mukatam yati. So they say it is that kind of reality where the Veda itself keeps mum. And how can you expect the reality to express itself or manifest itself through the Veda, the Upanishads? Because Upanishads say, na vidmo na vijanimo yadhaita danushishya, na tatra chakshur gacchati na vag gacchati no manaha, and yato vacho nivartante apra apyamanasasaha. So all these are the statements from the Upanishads. They themselves say that it is not that cannot be expressed through words. And therefore, Nata Sampradaya says, don't waste your time on the literary presentation of this. Don't go after the scriptures, don't go after the books, don't go after the speeches and discourses. But of course, we have to attend the webinar. So they say, the Natha teachers say that it can be only experienced. And what we have been doing is that we are repeating the statements of the saints, saying that that should be experienced, that should be experienced, and nobody is ready to experience it. And unless you get into yourself, that kind of first-hand experience is not possible. And you may ask me also, do you have the first-hand experience? And luckily, I was initiated into this tradition by Mahesh Yogi in the Netherlands, and I was there with him I learned direct meditation from him, and I have been practicing that, and I have got the result of that also, and I'm really blessed. So I am fortunate, and whatever little experience that I have got, I naturally compare with whatever has been stated in the scriptures, and then only I tell people. So it is, you be assured that some of this knowledge is first hand, and some of this knowledge is second hand also. But second hand knowledge is also equally important, like second hand books and second hand things. So sometimes they also carry some value. So I am telling this. So these Nata teachers had introduced the hatha practices, and in the Gorakhnath tradition, he says, on one side, this is the only birth you have to take care of, and don't waste your life in unnecessary intellectual pursuits. Second, your body is the secret of everything, and you prepare that for the high spiritual experiences. And three, don't be carried away by unnecessary philosophical disputes, because everything is possible in the kingdom of God. So this is the great um, thing that has come down to us in the Natha tradition, and especially when it comes to the Shat Chakra, the Kundalini, and Chetana, and Brahmande Yadastita Pinde, etc. These need to be studied afresh and need to be explored, especially in the modern context, because still we don't know what is Kundalini. Though Gopi Krishna, Paul Brent, and others had written exhaustive books on that, though they have explained to us what happens when the Kundalini is aroused, but nothing has been studied, especially on the uh, modern methodology, on the basis of modern methodology. So still chances are there, you can study, you can do research on the various phases of the Kundalini Jagarana or Chakra Bhedana, and especially the energy centers in the body need to be studied properly. Though Jnaneshwar Maharaj has made a very detailed presentation of that in his Jnaneshwari, that it is a gradual arousal of Kundalini, that it passes through Sushumna, it passes through all the chakra, and when it reaches a particular chakra, the yogi gets some occult powers, and he gets some intellectual powers also. And as he progresses to that, he will get high feeling of detachment. And when it reaches the Ajna chakra, then Jnanasya Anantya Jneyam Alpam, that is also stated in Patanjali Yoga Sutra. So that kind of a very secret yet sacred knowledge has come down, the wisdom has come down in the form of Natha tradition. But I tell you that other traditions are not to be belittled, because Natha Sampradaya also owes a lot to the other traditions. Therefore, we should understand that it is a kind of um, supermarket that we can get here. So everything you can get, it's a basket where you can get everything. So that kind of Natha Sampradaya, it presents so many topics for fresh study and research. And through this lecture, I would like to appeal to all the participants that you take any particular text or aspect of any Natha tradition and you work on that, you may get some new insight where you can work afresh. So there is a lot to be told, because if we take any particular theory also, we can get a lot to discuss. But because it's already 8 o'clock, I stop here, and I thank the organizers and especially the dynamic Vice Chancellor. So thank you all. Namaste.
Thank you very much, sir. So some people were asking for questions, sir. So can we?
Yes, please.
Yes, RK Yogi.
Acharya, namaste.
Namaste.
Lastly, I was in many of your lectures, in fact, and I'm very great fan of yours. And any lecture from you, I don't like to miss, basically. And more or less,
Thank you, sir.
more or less, I am an Eklavya Sishya to you, in a way. There are two questions as far as this particular lecture is concerned.
Please.
One thing is whether this Kanfatta yogis, all these things, they come under this category only. And Naga sadhus, what we hear at Kumbh Mela and all, are they also come under this Natha tradition? That is first thing. And second thing, as you said, you have been initiated in this tradition. Do you initiate people?
So wonderful, sir. So first question, the Naga Sampradaya, that was according to one tradition, that was the creation of Gorakhnath, especially to protect the Hindus from the onslaught of the Muslim. So the Naga sadhus, the tradition was created by Gorakhnath, they say, from Banaras. And before that, Naga, that Sampradaya was not in vogue. And second thing, that also belonged to the Natha, but they become the extremist of this tradition, the yoga tradition. And now in Kumbh Mela, etc., we find so many Naga, so many Aghori, and so many other Bhairava, etc. Actually, these are all the Tantra traditions prevailing even today in Madhya Pradesh, Bastar, Orissa, Assam, Bengal, and some parts of Uttar Pradesh also, like Datia. So we have the Tantra traditions prospering. And we cannot blame anybody saying that, since the society is growing, human society is becoming very prosperous, and we have all the flyovers, all the airports, and why do you unnecessarily waste your time in Naga, Nagna Sadhu, and see, Aghori, all that? We find in Aghori, the Gautam ashram is there in Benares. So some of the Aghoris are from engineering background, medical background. They are highly learned. And last time in Benares, when people approached a lady in midnight, 12 o'clock, she was sitting near a pyre, dead body, and she was meditating. And when they approached, she said, I worked in America for 12 years and I returned to India only to become an Aghorin. So we cannot say that these are all fools. They are actually highly intellectual, but the only thing is, see, it's very difficult to say. Something is personal, like death is personal, love is personal, God is personal, and religion is also personal. So how you are impressed by something is personal. So now Naga tradition is flourishing, and Aghori Sampradaya, lakhs of people are there in India, and some of them are highly, I told you, educated, but still they follow that. And recently in some place in Uttar Pradesh, so many Andhra people also went there and they became Aghori. And the head of the Aghora Matha, he is a very brilliant person. He can explain everything in detail. So that kind of tradition is still there. So this Charpatnatha or Kanifnatha and Gaininatha, so they were also intellectuals. They spread this to other corners of India, and we find offshoots of that. Natha Sampradaya, offshoots are found, like Shankaracharya's 4 Matha. But afterwards you find in India, in every corner there is a Shankar Math, not belonging to the original Maths. So in Benares or in Orissa, you find some other Maths. It's there. Like in Vedanta, we find in Natha Sampradaya also, several Maths, several heads are there, and very rich sannyasins are there. And murders also take place in mathas for the sake of the property. So that's a different thing. And second, unfortunately, I have not initiated anybody, because I am not a very great yogi that I can pass on this. But some disciples, some students had approached me seeking some knowledge, and whatever little I have got, I have been imparting that to the seeking students. And when it comes to the transcendental meditation and whatever I have practiced for the last almost 30 years, so that is with me And the secrets I have been sharing with my students now and then. Whenever the proper occasion arises, I put there some tadka and some masala and make it tasty. So that is my practice. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Tomorrow we have two sessions. One on yoga and tourism by Subba Vaidyanathanji, and the second one on textual studies and research in yoga, its importance and scope by Dr. Jayaraman Mahadevan of Indica Yoga. So we'll be having two sessions, one from 7 to 8, and the second from will be continuing from 8 to 9. So that is the schedule for tomorrow, and we wish that everyone will be again participating with the same enthusiasm. So I think we will.
Yeah, Anju, one more question in the box.
One more question is there. Yes, sir.
Anjur is there. Hi. So she says, I want to ask about the Bholenath's connection with Nata Parampara. And like you mentioned, regarding their propagation of unifying all beliefs, is their core Shaiva? Yes, absolutely. And this Bholenath, it is actually another name for Shiva. So it is the Adinatha that they attribute the origin of the system. So they say it has come down from Shankara only. Shankara is, you can say Gorakhnath is an incarnation of Shankara, they say. And Matsyendranath was incarnation of Vishnu, they believe. And really a very sacred one, because we are completely fascinated, or you can say eluded by the city life and the attractions of the human society. We are carried away. Now, I'm very sorry to say that we don't carry that pure yoga. We are carrying only a replica of that, like a small picture of that. Whatever is there in the lone place of that, either Nashik, that top of the mountain, or in Bharturhari Guha in Ujjain. So that is original yoga that they experienced and passed on. And whatever we are doing, we are actually reproducing what they experienced. And that's why we are the courier services, and mine is Penna Courier Service. That's all. So very sorry to say. But the Natha and Shaiva thinkers had simply unified all these theories. And you know, another addition is Dattatreya. Though Dattatreya is a very old tradition, in Shandilya Upanishad, towards the last chapter, you find the meaning of Datta and Atreya. And Dattatreya is also a kind of synthetic philosophy. It's not very hard, because Dattatreya itself a combination of Brahma, Vishnu, Rudra. So therefore it is like our Hara Harihara Advaita in Ayyappa. So like that we find a combination of all this. So thank you all, thank you very much. And now you must feel hungry, and therefore we take leave.
Thank you, sir. So we'll be concluding the session with the Shanti Mantra, recitation of Shanti Mantra. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayah, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you everyone, and we'll meet tomorrow